Let me give you one final theory that might help us make sense of nature mysticism. And it goes back to a neurologist by the name of Michael Persinger. And he's a Canadian neurologist, and he had a hunch that you could actually create the experience of the presence of God by putting a helmet upon people and shooting magnetic rays into their temporal lobe. Now, your temporal lobe is a part of the brain where you sort of think through your space in relations to others. And in a series of experiments, by putting on his God helmet, as he called it, and shooting magnetic rays into the brain at the temporal lobe, he could induce it so that about 70% of his patients felt a presence beyond themselves. Some people called that God, some people called that just a spirit, but they began to sense something. Persinger thought he had discovered the space where God interacts with the world. Now, this has interesting implications for nature mysticism because maybe there are all these holy places in the earth where people historically have been drawn for spiritual reasons, whether it's Easter Island, Uluru in Australia, Chichen Itza in Mexico, Glastonbury or Angkor Wat. Maybe people feel a presence there because of the magnetism that's there. Maybe that's a scientific explanation why we are drawn to certain places that are spiritual and those are not. And so maybe what our brain is doing is sensing the divine in places where the magnetism is stronger. And what Persinger's study shows is that, hey, this is the mechanics of how God makes us feel close in nature. And furthermore, there have been arguments over the years that there's certain sort of places where God exists, lines of spiritual energy. These are sometimes called earth chakras, spiritual vortices, ley lines. Well, maybe those are actually lines of magnetism on the earth, and we have come to take those experiences that we feel in places of high magnetism on our temporal lobe and equated them with God. And thus we have this sort of energy, spiritual energy system. Now, that is all super speculative, but it is interesting. But here's the problem. No one has quite been able to duplicate Persinger's studies. In other words, no one has been able to get the God helmet to work like he did. And so maybe there's a problem in the study. Maybe shooting that part of the brain with magnetism isn't the cause of people feeling God. Maybe he got people who tended to feel God, gave them suggestion that they would feel God, and then the studies showed that. But if Persinger's God helmet is actually a thing, maybe there's something to this idea of communing with nature and having a sense of divine intertwined. That's how this argument goes. It's speculative, but interesting.